Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger with the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for July 12th, 2023. Today we're going to take a look at the war hawks that are behind the NATO summit and the decision to continue a war against Russia and Ukraine. The meeting yesterday in Vilnius was a disappointment for Zelensky and his war hawks, but NATO decided that they would announce there will eventually be membership for Ukraine in NATO, but not now. Now, this is not acceptable to Zelensky and his team. Zelensky immediately denounced the decision. He called NATO indecisive, the Western alliance as weak sisters. But some of his aides went further. Yermak, who's the head of Zelensky's office of the presidency, said that unfortunately, the leaders in the West seem to lack an understanding that Russia is, quote, a country of terrorists, unquote. Well, a chief advisor to Zelensky in his office, Podolyak, did an interview with Radio Liberty, and he said Zelensky would discuss with Biden, quote, the question of Russia's defeat. It is assistance to Ukraine that will accelerate the finalization of Russia's existence, unquote. The finalization of Russia's existence. They intend to destroy Russia. And that's what NATO is trying to use Ukraine to do. Now, meanwhile, NATO did pledge more arms and money to Ukraine and no negotiation. Just as an example of one of the think tanks behind NATO, the Royal United Services Institute, had a commentary published yesterday in which they said that cluster weapons are needed for success in the war to, quote, create the necessary preconditions for a viable peace, unquote. What do they mean by a viable peace? This is a peace of the grave. For how many more Ukrainians are going to die to be sacrificed on behalf of the transatlantic goal of destroying Russia? Now, Blinken was interviewed by NBC television, and he said about the cluster bombs, if we don't do it, then they will run out of ammunition. If they run out of ammunition, they will be defenseless. Well, why not go a step further? If you're running out of ammunition, why not end the war? Why not engage in negotiations that take into consideration the legitimate security demands of Russia and Ukraine, which is what Putin would put on the table for the last 15 years? Well, because that's not their intent. Their intent, as Podolyak said, is to carry out a war to destroy Russia. Now, the question that comes up is, who really benefits from this war? How does this help the American people or the people of Europe? Because in fact, you can make a very strong case that this is extremely damaging to the future for the people who live in the transatlantic world. So I want to take a look at Blinken's background to get at this question of who benefits from these kinds of policies. Now, Blinken, after he left the Obama administration, went to work, or he created something called WestExec Advisers LLC. Now, this is an example of the revolving door that exists, where people go from government to private corporations and then back to government. Blinken founded this with other alumni of the Obama administration in 2017, including Michelle Flournoy, who is an Undersecretary of Defense, Lisa Monaco, who is the former counterterror advisor to Obama, Robert Work, a top Defense Department official, Avril Haines, who is now Biden's National Security Director, Jen Psaki, who I think most of you know who she is, and David Cohen, who is the former deputy director of the CIA. These were among the initial employees, but the founders were Blinken and Flournoy. Now, they said that the idea in forming this was to employ people with government experience who have current knowledge, expertise, contacts, and networks. Now, who are the contacts and the networks? Contacts in government and contacts in the military-industrial complex. They set up a non-disclosure agreement to protect their clients, but the stories have leaked out as to who some of these clients are. Blackstone investment firm, one of the largest investment firms in the world, Bank of America, Facebook, not surprisingly, SoftBank, a Japanese conglomerate, Lazard, which is one of the leading investment banks in the world, AT&T, Royal Bank of Canada, and software security firm Palantir Technology. Now, the idea when they set it up was to have a connection between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley. Flournoy, who was one of the founders, said that the whole goal is to, quote, facilitate cooperation between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon on artificial intelligence and drone image technology. Now, Flournoy said that the goal is to help the Department of Defense have access to Silicon Valley technology. And the goal is, quote, to bring the national security and cybersecurity communities together, unquote. How wonderful. Now, an example of this is a partnership with something called Jigsaw, which is an in-house think tank of Google. Jigsaw, just as an example of its earlier history, in 2012, it promoted a project to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State that would facilitate regime change in Syria by offering a map for expanding the known opposition to Assad, to bring it together in one picture. Now, another example of this is something called Project Maven from 2017, which is an image recognition capability for drone targeting. The idea is to help drone analysts identify buildings, individuals, vehicles, and events on battlefields. The official title of Project Maven is, quote, the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Teams. Now, when you look at this kind of discussion, what you see is openly admitting that they're making money by promoting these kinds of new warfare technologies. And this is where $900 billion of American taxpayer money is going, to these kinds of operations. Now, one might ask, with $900 billion in defense spending, how is it that the U.S. is running short of ammunition? Well, this is spread around to the billionaires who live outside the Beltway in Washington, who run these tech firms and run these consulting firms. During the transition period to the Biden administration, Politico had an article about WestExec titled, quote, the secretive consulting firm that's become Biden's cabinet in waiting. Now, this is a similar firm to something called Albright Stonebridge Group. One of the top officials of that's named after Madeleine Albright, by the way, one of the top officials there was Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's now Biden's UN ambassador. Now, WestExec also includes Republicans, including former officials in the George W. Bush administration, and a character named Elbridge Colby, who was an assistant secretary of defense in the Trump administration. So it's a uniparty, although it tends to be much more at this point of the Democratic neocon networks. That keep in mind that Flournoy was projected to be Secretary of Defense, and she was the initial choice of Biden, but it was decided she was too cozy with the military-industrial complex. But she also served as the co-founder of the Center for a New American Security, which is a think tank of what is basically Democratic neocons, including the former CEO, the notorious Victoria Nuland. Now, then look at the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, went from the military to Raytheon Board of Directors, and now he's Secretary of Defense. So this is what makes up, this is a cross-section of what makes up the military-industrial complex. The interrelationship of government positions, think tanks, with tech firms, armaments companies like Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and so on, that then fund think tanks like the Center for New American Strategy, which basically puts forward a series of proposals for how to assure that the American military maintains its position as the sole superpower so that those companies that are represented among the corporate conglomerates can continue to loot the world, and anyone that stands in the way gets crushed, like Libya, like Syria, which fortunately has not been crushed. So this is what's behind the whole NATO war in Ukraine. It's not about Ukrainian security and freedom. And I say this to my Ukrainian friends, don't fall for the line that they care about your freedom and security. If they did, they wouldn't send the International Monetary Fund in to reorganize your economy. They wouldn't sell off your national assets to BlackRock, Vanguard, and others. This is a pure business proposition of the billionaires of the corporate conglomerates who use the military for their purposes. And at this point, they're targeting Russia because of Russia's role as a leader among those nations that it is committed to the sovereignty of nations so they can act to defend the interests of their people. That's why Ukrainians are dying right now, for the military-industrial complex and its billionaires. So thanks for joining me today. We'll have more tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.